I'm Kyla and welcome back to the Infinite Library, and today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of July, and somehow I read quite a lot. Unexpectedly, I really thought I was going to be averaging like 10-11 books because that is what I mostly do, but somehow I managed to read 26 books in the month of July, plus 3 DNFs though, so on top of those 26, 3 DNFs, and I finished the month with 3 ongoing reads. So that's kind of insane. As you'll see, I've actually quite a big variety of what I read this month, and part of that is because I've been doing the Goodreads Awards Challenge. When this is posted, my second part of the Goodreads Challenge Awards will be up, so you can actually see more detailed reviews of the 6 books that I read. For that, I was actually doing the YA fiction versus the history and biography. So I just read a bunch of stuff that maybe is not my normal stuff, basically, but I had a good time. And yeah, I actually read quite a bit in July. I'm now a few days into August, and I've gotta say I'm slumping a little bit. I had a bit of a mental health dip towards the very end of the month, so I don't think I'm going to be reading anywhere near as much in August as I read in July. But the other thing about July, which if my t-shirt does not give it away, is it was Summerween. So I also read a whole lot of horror in this month, which was great. I love like just any kind of like creepy sort of themed event, any excuse to do things that are Halloween-y, to read horror, that kind of thing. I love it. So yeah, I read quite a lot and I had a fairly mixed bag of books, as you'll see when we get to the ratings. So in terms of the stats, let's get this out of the way before I talk about the actual books in question. I read 7,972 pages in the month of July, which is more than it was last month by a good 1,000 or so somehow, but I definitely have been reading manga this month, which, as I say, kind of skews that page thing always because you get through them so fast. So format wise, of the books that I read 18 of these books physically, 7 digitally, 5 audio only, and then 2 I read in tandem, so a mix of audio and physical. Then genre wise, which is actually how I'm going to be talking about these books today, I've decided to split them by genre, going from the least liked book to the most liked book for that genre. But of that genre, I read 9 fantasy, 7 horror, 6 manga, 5 non-fiction, 3 romance, and 2 graphic novels. And then the source, I got 12 of these books from the library, 11 were from my existing TBR, 4 I bought. I think most of those were actually audiobooks that I just couldn't get copies of, so I ended up reading them by audiobook instead. 4 were arcs from NetGalley, and 1 was a reread, which I believe was actually also from the library, now I come to think about it, but we're counting it anyway. And then finally, in terms of the ratings, I gave no 1 stars, standard for me. I rarely ever 1 star a book. I did, however, have 3 2 stars, which is not amazing, 14 3 stars, 7 4 stars, and 2 5 stars. Obviously I had 3 DNFs as well, so I didn't rate any of the DNFs, but I got 2 5-star books this month, which I'm pretty happy about, to be honest. Like, getting at least 1 5-star book in a month is great for me. Getting 2 is amazing. So that does work out as an average rating overall of 3.41, which I think is slightly lower than last month. It was a 3.5 last month. So that is all the stats out the way. So now we can get on to the actual books themselves. So we're going to start with my most read genre, which is fantasy. It's generally always my most read genre, to be honest. So we're actually going to start with the 2 books that were DNFs, because yes, 2 of my DNFs were fantasy this month, unfortunately. I'm very sorry to say that I have DNF'd Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. I've been reading this as part of Literary Diversion's Fits Along, and I have been struggling with my reread of the series. Just for backstory, basically, I originally read the first 2 books this is the Farseer trilogy, which is Assassin's Apprentice and Royal Assassin. I read them about 6 or so years ago, I think, when I was doing my master's degree, I think it was, and I really enjoyed those 2 books back at the time. I think I rated them a 4 out of 5 star. I think I enjoyed them a lot. And then I attempted to read Assassin's Quest, and I was not having the best year, and it was the wrong time for me to read it, basically, is what I assumed. And I just found this book to be super depressing, and I struggled to get through it, so I dropped it. At that time, I was like, I'll come back to it in a later time when I'm hopefully in a better mental state and be able to enjoy this. So I thought, oh, with the fit so long, I will come back to this series. I will finally finish this book that I never finished. I reread the first 2 books as well for this read along, and something wasn't quite clicking for me. When I was rereading them, I found I wasn't really enjoying them that much, and I was actually dropping the rating down from what they were, unfortunately. So I really wasn't enjoying the reading experience. I very quickly realised I don't like the protagonist in this book series, unfortunately, Fitz. And if you don't like Fitz, then that does kind of kill the series for you. But I was like, I didn't hate the first 2 books, I just wasn't really enjoying them, but I thought I really want to try and finish this. And I managed to get further than where I was when I originally dropped it. And I just realised that I was not reaching for this. I realised I didn't care. And yeah, I made it to about 200 pages. I think this is quite a chunk of a book as well. This is probably about, I want to say 800. Yeah, just over 800 pages. But yeah, I realised that this story, these characters, they just weren't working for me. And part of me thinks that maybe epic fantasy is just not really something I'm finding myself drawn to that much at the moment. Like, I'm just not particularly enjoying it as much. So yeah, I decided in the end that it was just a struggle for me to carry this on, and I think I just had to admit to myself that the Fitz books, at least, are just not for me in this series. I am going to be carrying on with Robin Hobb. I'm actually going to be reading Ship of Magic next, which I have read before and really enjoyed, but again, it was a long time ago, so we'll see. But I'm hoping it's just the Fitz books that don't work for me, and not all the Robin Hobb, because I really would like to read more Robin Hobb's books. So we'll see. But yeah, sadly, this did end up being a DNF, so this series is a DNF for me. I'm not going to try and read any of the Fitz books. In the Farseer series, the Elderling story series is what it's called. So yeah, unfortunate, but I'm honestly, like, as soon as I DNF'd, I felt such relief at not trying to force myself to get through this. And I did, because I was like kind of curious about where it was going, so I did kind of look up what's going to happen in the rest of the storyline, just to kind of satisfy myself that I made the right decision. Because I think sometimes when you find out something that is going to happen, and that actually makes you want to go back to it, but I didn't enjoy where the story went either. So I think it's just, yeah, I'm just going to have to live with the fact this is a miss for me. So that was a DNF. I also did DNF one of the books that I was trying to read for my Goodreads award. This was in the romantasy category. This is an Egyptian romantasy, which I don't know very much about because I did not get very far into this. I rarely DNF books as early as I DNF'd this, but I got maybe like 2 or 3 chapters in, and the writing style was just not good. Something about it, it was very clunky. Sentences just didn't really seem to make sense a lot of the time, and yeah, I just couldn't with this one. So, and it's quite a chunky one as well, and I was just really struggling with the writing style, which rarely happens for me. But yeah, it just, no, I really didn't have a good time with it, so I made the decision to DNF it. So I am going to be passing this on. This is the Illumicrate version, but yeah, it's just not for me, sadly. So yeah, that is a DNF. I then read a bunch of other books, obviously, for the romantasy category. I'm not going to go into great depth about these in review because I have that whole video, like I said, which is where I do go in depth about them. But I read Hanging City by Charlie N. Holmberg. I picked this purely because it said it was a troll romance, and I was like, I want to see where this goes. And it did give me a troll romance, which I was happy about. But overall, this was not a bad book, but I don't think it was a great book either. I would say it was just quite mid, to be honest. Our protagonist wasn't particularly amazing, and I didn't like the ending at all. I found it to be quite dissatisfying, but there were really cool things with the world building, and I did like the side characters quite a lot, just not a main character. So yeah, this was just okay, I think. I then read the Foxglove King. This was my replacement basically for the Jasad Heir. Obviously got a lot of hype, I know. This is a a dark fantasy. I suppose I think it's that dark actually, having read it, but like it's geared up to be like this scary gothic thing because the girl can use like death magic and stuff. And it is essentially a romantic triangle, although actually the romance was kind of simmered down a lot. There was not as much romance as I was expecting in this book to say it was a romantasy, but I just was bored. Honestly, I know this is popular, but I was just bored. Nothing really happened that excited me. The main character was fine. I thought one of the romantic interests, the prince, I thought he was fine. I found the guy who was the priest to be very frustrating, and I found their relationship to be very frustrating and very like toxic, I guess. Overall, I don't think this had anything really new to show me. I don't think the story was particularly memorable. And whilst I definitely didn't like I didn't hate this or anything like that, I thought it was just fine. And it unfortunately does fall into that it's just okay kind of book for me. I gave it a 3. I did like it more than I liked Hanging City. I already can't remember very much about it, which is everything. I then read a book which I don't own because it was a library book and it had to go back, but that was The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, which is her latest book. And it is a fantasy, historical fantasy actually, set within like the Spanish Revolution kind of time period. And it is about a scullery maid who basically is able to perform like small, simple magics, and her employer finds out and starts trying to use that to her advantage to like sort of gain like a better position in society, that kind of thing. And it ends up going into like a much bigger plot line where she is end up basically to be used as part of this competition, which basically if she wins she will end up sort of being like a bodyguard to the king or whatever it was. I can't quite remember. And again, unfortunately, this was just fine. I really kind of expected a bit more from it. I have mixed experience with Leigh Bardugo in that I just didn't really enjoy the Shadow and Bone series, but I love her Six of Crows series. I really liked Ninth House when I read it earlier this year, and for me, in terms of the tone, and particularly in terms of the romance, it falls more into the Shadow and Bone category for me than it does in the Six of Crows. I thought the romance was very similar to like one that's in that. I didn't particularly enjoy the romance. It was just okay, but I didn't enjoy this whole thing they have where basically it's like it's the same thing as in Shadow and Bone. It's this guy who's like lived for a very long time basically with like a young girl who doesn't know much, and I don't enjoy that trope. Like, I thought the writing was good, don't get me wrong. I weirdly enjoy the character I liked the most ended up being her mistress, who was like horrible at the beginning, but I loved her character development, so weirdly I liked that part of it, but I never really warmed to the main character that much. I thought a betrayal that happens later on was obvious. I did enjoy like what little we had of the competition. There wasn't really a big emphasis on the competition, to be honest, and I liked seeing the other people who were there and that kind of thing, but honestly the competition was like such a nothing thing in the whole story, and it was over very fast, which I thought was unfortunate. It's not one that I think was going to stick with me, and yeah, I didn't love it. So thankfully though, the next 2 fantasy books were ones that I actually genuinely did enjoy. So I read Evocation by St. Gibson. This was for my book club, but I was just dying to get to it anyway, and I really love this one. I gave this a 4.5 overall, and this was just kind of like what I wanted it to be. Basically, like, it was good writing. We had a really interesting poly relationship in here. Moira, I love her so much. She's such a great character. I adore her. And I'm really looking forward to there being more books in this series because it made it very clear that this first book is basically about David, and that the next book is going to be about Reese, who is basically, there is like a throuple that kind of happens throughout this book. So we have David, who is kind of like this really popular rich medium that comes from a wealthy background, and he is the main character in our book. And basically what happens is that it turns out there's been this like devil's deal that happened thousands of years ago, and they are coming to collect the firstborn son on his 30th birthday if they don't already have an heir, and that is essentially David. So he's basically like gets semi-possessed through the course of this book, and I actually thought the possession element was really not at the forefront of this book. This is not a book if you are expecting like action and stuff, and that did turn some people off in the book club. Like, I think a lot of the people really love this book and other people didn't like it, and I think for me this is a character book, and if you are not interested in the character stuff, especially if you don't like these characters, then this book just isn't going to work for you. But St. Gibson really is kind of like a character focused writer. Like, I read Dowry of Blood and that very much came across well in that. Like, she writes very sultry, slow, character driven stories, and the plot is not necessarily the biggest part of it. So I think that was probably, it's a complaint, but it's not, because I still like what we got, in that it really wasn't the biggest part of the story, was the demon possession aspect. It didn't come in until, like, really as being an important thing until later on, because so much of what this is really about is about him reconnecting with an old ex who is now married with a wife, Moira. They have been called in to help him try and solve this issue, and in doing so they kind of like reconnect, and he forms this new bond with Moira and they start learning about magic. And yeah, I really liked this, but it is definitely not for everybody who comes in expecting this to be a demon contra book, because this is not really what it is. It is very much geared around relationships, which I personally really like. So yeah, this is David's book, obviously. The next book we're going to get is Reese, who is the ex. And then the third book is going to be Moira, who is his wife, who is my favourite character. And then we're finally going to be getting, I think the last book is going to be about David's sister, sorry. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'm really looking forward to there being more books. We don't have a release date next for another one, but I'm excited to be able to like read more from the series, because yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought they could have been maybe a bit more world building, but I do think we're going to get more of that in the second book. One thing, but on the back of this one, like, I actually have two variants of this, because I have like the standard cover and also like the tour cover, which is pink. But on the back, it actually like says some things, which is kind of like tropes for the book, which I didn't even notice until someone in the book club mentioned it. And they said, file under fated triangle, double Leo, cursed all this time, a psychic's intuition. So yeah, if any of those things are kind of your buzzwords, then I guess this book is for you. But yeah, really enjoyed it. I've got one more book by St. Gibson to read now, which is An Education in Malice, and I've given both of these books 4 stars so far, so I'm hoping, you know, I will like that one also. And then finally, we have Road of the Fallen, which was a 5-star for me, which I was not expecting for a romantasy. But this just hit all the right buttons for me, basically. Like, I really enjoyed it. I thought the writing was good. The audiobook is really good for this. Normally, I would gush for ages about a 5-star, but this was in my Goodreads challenge. So yeah, you'll have to go to there to read the full review for that, basically. But yeah, this was everything I wanted. I love the main character. She can step on me any day. And yeah, I'm very excited to read the second book in this. This, honestly, if anyone ever read the Dark Hunter series by Sherilyn Kenyon, the vibes were so there for this book, which I love that series. Like, I've grown out of it a little bit now, but this was like a more well-written version with a good story, essentially. So yeah, really love this. For anyone that doesn't know, this is about a woman called Carmilla, who is an artist, and she ends up getting embroiled essentially in a bargain with a prince of hell, and shenanigans ensue, I guess. He is taking part in this like ancient game with the Fae to try and restore his realm, which is rapidly just dissolving, and she also gets involved in the game for her own reasons. And yeah, it's just really got some great twists, great writing, great audiobook. Highly recommend. Okay, we're now going to go over all the horror books I read, which were, I think it was 6 books, but one of them is an ongoing book, so I'm not talking about that one. Most of these I actually fairly enjoyed. So the lowest rating we do have from this is a 3. I didn't DNF any, but the lowest rating we have is The Book Eaters by Sonia Dean. This was almost a 2-star, to be honest. But there were elements of this that I still really enjoyed, so I still rated it a 3-star in the end. This was actually a buddy read with a friend of mine, and she didn't like it. She rated it 2 stars. I found elements of this that I really did like, enough to give it a 3-star, but it is a book that I will never read again, and it's a book I definitely struggled through. We read this over quite a long period of time, which didn't really work that well for me, I think, because I was like forgetting things because we took such long gaps, which may have impacted my reading, but I think honestly this book just didn't work for me. So this is about a woman who is from this like long line of people who are book eaters. They don't eat normal food, they eat books and they absorb the information. And she has a son who is a mind eater, which basically is the same thing, except he wants to eat people's brains. So she is on the run basically from her family, and they want to kill her son and bring her back basically. They're this very like old-fashioned traditional society basically, and I really enjoyed all the stuff that was kind of like set in the past. This is kind of like a dual timeline kind of thing throughout this book. So we are following like what happened to her in the past to where she is now today, and I enjoyed that storyline quite a lot. I really quite liked it. And then the other part is following her and her son in the present and how they're kind of existing, and then they get embroiled in like trying to find this other family along with this woman, and I didn't really enjoy that at all, to be honest. I found the present day stuff to be really boring. It got a little bit more interesting as it went on, but overall I genuinely really only enjoyed like the past stuff, not any of the present day stuff. And yeah, overall this book was just a total miss for me. It's a shame because this was a book that I really thought I was going to love. It's such an interesting premise. I love that it's a horror. But overall, yeah, I found I didn't really care for the characters, not even the kid, which is not great. And yeah, the book eating stuff was very messy, I think. And it ended very messy as well. And overall, yeah, this book just didn't work for me. I'm not going to be holding on to this, unfortunately. I'm going to be unhauling it. I don't really have a whole lot to say. This is quite a short book, to be honest, as well. It felt like the lore was interesting, but the plot just wasn't. I then read for Summerween You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Callan Byron, who was the author of Cinderella is Dead and a bunch of other stuff. Those are like her more popular books, I think. But the amount of people I saw reading this over Summerween was actually hilarious. I mean, it very does fit the Summerween vibes because it is set in the summer basically, and it is set at a camp that is essentially like a reenactment camp of horror movies, very much in the style of Friday the 13th, that's set in like a summer camp, and then you've got like a killer going around and killing people. And this is like a very self-aware kind of book from this, and our main girl, Charity, like plays the role of the final girl. And basically they kind of shut up for the summer, but people go missing. And then more people go missing, and I didn't really expect the direction this was going to go in. I thought this was going to be quite a straightforward slasher kind of thing, and it actually goes in a little bit of a supernatural way, which I wasn't really expecting. And I didn't really have a lot to say about this. I read this quite quickly. It's just fun. I don't think it was particularly brilliant. I thought it was quite campy. I thought like the overall like what was happening was just a bit silly, so I enjoyed it less as it went on because I really enjoyed how it began and how like aware it was of itself. And then I thought it just kind of got a little too silly and campy, and not in a good way. Like, I love campy, but it got silly. I did like the ending though. I thought it was a really solid ending choice that they did. I'm not going to say what it is, obviously, because spoilers. But yeah, overall, this is great if you just want something quick and fun to read that is very, like, pop culture aware and savvy. This fits the bill, but I don't think it's anything amazing, unfortunately. It kind of let it down for me in the latter half. I then picked up Freakslaw, which is by Jane Flett, I think. This was actually a book I originally wanted to read for Chimera because that was one of the books that the author was going to be there for, and it's essentially about this like demented circus that comes to like this really restrictive like Scottish town in the 90s basically. Like, it's a great concept, and I wanted to read it for that, but I didn't think the book was actually out yet at the time, and it was really hard to get hold of. But I waited quite a while for it to come in at the library. It did finally come in, so yeah, I picked that up to read, and I had a very mixed experience with it, I would say. Overall, I ended up giving it a 3-star, but I feel like it was very close to a 4-star with me. Like, the concept was great. I thought the characters were so interesting. It had like a very large cast, to the point that we did have like an index at the beginning of like all the characters. They were like barely in it, but like there was a lot of like all the circus people and all the people in the village, and it was this big like melting pot. It was obviously a big commentary as well on things like homophobia, on things like racism, that kind of thing, because it was a very queer kind of story. But it was obviously doing the whole like the circus people were the freaks who were disrupting the town, and the town basically it geared itself up eventually till it got into like a mob mentality. Also, there was this one girl who was in the circus who was like practicing magic and kind of messing with people, which didn't help with the mob mentality thing at all. And I did like this book, but with a caveat, I would say that I didn't enjoy the horror it tried to do. As like a psychological think piece kind of commentary on society, I thought it was really good. And I thought there was, again, like the characters were so interesting, but it did the kind of horror where it's basically just like, we're going to be gross for the sake of being gross. And I don't like that kind of horror. I love me some body horror, don't get me wrong, but I don't like stuff when it's just like people are just gonna act gross because it's nasty and it'll scare you and it makes you uncomfortable, and that's not my kind of type of horror at all. Like, I like horror that either makes you think or is just really weird, and this didn't really hit that bill for me, which is a shame because I really thought it was going to. So yeah, I had a very mixed experience with this, and I basically, for like a full day after reading it, was just not sure what I was going to rate it. And in the end, I did, like, I was so torn to give it a 4, but I think like the way the horror didn't work for me, it was enough to land it down to a 3. So like plot-wise, story-wise, it's a solid 4-star, but I just didn't really like the execution of it that well. It was interesting, it had some really interesting characters. I would hesitate to recommend it just because I think the gross aspects in it are enough to possibly really put people off it. But if that kind of thing is something that maybe you can like look past, then maybe, yeah, I would say give it a try because it has some really interesting things to say. I read an arc after that, which was the very highly anticipated new book by Chuck Tingle, which is called Bury Your Gaze. This is very much a commentary on like Hollywood and about how Hollywood and like media basically kind of sees queerness and queer relationships from the spectrum of the bury your gaze trope, which is obviously what this book is named after, to the kind of thing in that like what you see with like corporate sponsors like adopting the pride stuff and then just ignoring it straight away, like, and having this very like sanitized stereotypical idea of queerness and gay people and the queer community. And also about how this like more this thing we've seen very much recently, and like it's kind of been seen as like a cool fad with like more mainstream shows that are queer becoming more mainstream and popular. Really interesting. Basically the actual story itself is about a writer who is like very popular, and he is writing like the season finale of his series, and he wants to make the two main women in the series, who he's always seen as queer, be outwardly admitting it to each other and getting into a relationship, and the studio is like, no, you are not doing it. If you are doing it, you are killing them right afterwards, and we're having new characters. And he is not happy about this, and then things get weird. This is also a very big satirization of like AI and how scary AI is, particularly in like potential uses it could have in the future. I don't want to spoil anything about that because I thought it was really interesting. But basically he ends up being haunted by things that are from his stories, and we find out a lot about the history of like how he wrote his stories and what they mean to him, and his own personal kind of background, like as a clearly kind of gay writer who was not actually out, his experience of like being in the closet. And yeah, it was a really good book. It didn't quite hit the bill as much as I thought it was going to. I don't think it quite had the emotional impact that I really thought it was going for. So it didn't get a 5-star for me, but it was a solid 4-star, and it was a good time, and I enjoyed what it was saying, basically. If the lighting has changed, it's because it's actually a few hours later, but I am back, and we're going to be carrying on with the last 2 books in the horror category. So next I read, well actually I read this in tandem. I kind of alternated between the audiobook and the physical for this one, but actually more so the audiobook because it was a pretty decent audiobook. But this is Stephen King's From a Buick 8. This was picked out of my TBR jar by the very lovely Laura last month, and it's been a rec that I've had from a friend of mine for like a year or so now, and I finally got to it. And happy to say that I actually quite enjoyed this. Like the premise didn't really kind of draw me in, I've got to say. It's set in this like police barracks kind of thing, and there's this old Buick in a shed and weird things happen. And I kind of assumed this was going to be something like along the lines of Christine, where it's like an evil car, but that's not really the case in this. and this is much more of a sci-fi. It's also quite a slow story, and there is a lot of like build-up, because basically it is about these group of men who work there, and the father of one of like the new guys that is kind of working there at the moment, who's very young still, and he's supposed to be going to university soon, just kind of like part-time working there basically, and his father passed away some time ago, and he was obsessed with this car in the shed. And it is basically everyone telling him about all the events over the years of what happened with this car, and I guess also kind of like what was happening along the rest of the police barracks, but it's all kind of about these weird things that keep happening around this car. And I actually ended up really liking this. I think it's one that people maybe wouldn't like as much. Like, I feel like maybe it's not one that would appeal to too many people, because it is extremely character focused. It takes a long time for anything to get going, but I was actually really enjoying it. And I've gotta say, things that came out of this car, I have not felt like that unsettled and nauseous in a book in a while. It really got me. Like, I can't say I was like really scared of this book, but it was very like this creepy eldritch stuff, and it really got me, I've gotta say. So yeah, actually quite a decent book, I'm glad to report. And then the final book that I read, which was my favourite horror book that I read this month, was actually another arc, and it's Heads Will Roll by Josh Winning. I know Josh Winning has written a few other things before, but mostly YA, I want to say. I think they might have like one other kind of horror thing, and I think this one is tagged, I think, as a YA horror, but also I think the characters are adults, so I'm not actually sure if it's classed as adult or horror, to be honest. But I really enjoyed this one. I definitely want to check out more about this author, and essentially it is about a girl who we don't find out her name for quite a while, but she basically goes by the name Willow in this book, and that is because it is the name of the character that she plays in this like really popular kind of sitcom show called Everyone Loves Willow. And basically this whole book, as well as it being like another kind of like summer camp horror kind of thing with like people going missing, so again it has some links here to You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight, but this one takes a much more of a like a thoughtful political kind of take, and it's also queer, which we love. So basically Willow ends up saying something on the internet which basically gets her cancelled essentially, and her life is kind of over, and what she said was kind of like something she meant like as a joke, and it got taken completely the wrong way basically, and she gets completely like doxxed online by Tattletale kind of blog kind of thing, and she's getting death threats and stuff, and yeah, everything is just going really badly, and she goes away to like this adult only summer camp retreat thing where it's like basically everyone who's there has been cancelled in some kind of way, and the whole rule with the camp is that it's like a complete digital detox, like all their phones are taken away, no technology is allowed, not even like iPods and stuff. So yeah, she goes there, and it's quickly clear that things are like slightly weird, but I really enjoyed this one, more so for the commentary. I think I'm trying to think of what happened in the actual plot, and honestly some of it is pretty typical horror, and I don't think the plot was anything particularly exceptional, but I really thought the conversations that were had between the characters were really good. A lot of the other characters are kind of stereotypes, I suppose, apart from this one girl who she ends up getting close to, but I still thought it was really well done. And again, it had some really great things to say about cancel culture and all of that kind of thing. And yeah, just really enjoyed it basically. So there is an arc, it is out, I believe it is actually out now, so you should be able to check it out. Same for Bury Your Gaze. I know that one is already out as well now because I've actually seen that out and about. And yeah, both of them were honestly really solid horror books. But I just preferred Heads Will Roll just a little bit more. It was very much my vibe. Like the main character Willow, like she was a massive horror movie fan, and there were so many references like packed in this book, which was great to see. So I was just loving like all these little nods to the horror genre, and like her being like, I know what not to do because I know horror movies so well, that kind of thing. And yeah, really good, really good. So that is all the horror. Next we're going to move on to the manga. I have one of these physically, but we are starting from the bottom, and that is that my worst manga I read, I guess, was actually just like a little thing that I just picked up on library borrow box, essentially. And it was just like a one-shot BL kind of book called Delivery for You. It's essentially just like this guy falls in love with this guy who delivers his Amazon parcels, and it's cute and it's fine, and that was all there was to it, really. I've seen this story done before, like not this specific story, although there is that specific storyline in a side couple of Cherry Magic, I believe. So this is definitely not the first time I've seen it done. However, I don't know which one was first, but yeah, there just wasn't very much to this. It was only one volume. There really wasn't anything that exciting to it. I didn't really get invested in the characters or anything. I think the only thing I found in it that I actually quite liked was that our main character was trying to improve himself to kind of live up to what he thought were expectations for the other guy. Like, the guy had no expectations and I actually just liked him, but he was kind of like, oh, this guy's like really hot and really fit, and I just stay indoors all the time. So he starts going like running and stuff and trying to get fitter, and I did quite like that storyline, but otherwise nothing happened. So yeah, it was fine. I gave it a 2.75. I had nothing else to say about it, basically. I then read Doubt Volume 2. If you may remember that I read the first volume of Doubt back in my Reading 30 Manga in 30 Days. It's only, well, if you buy the omnibuses, it's only a 2-volume series. It's technically 4 volumes, but these omnibus editions like basically parcel up 2 each. So this was like the conclusion to it. I quite liked Doubt. When I read it, it wasn't really bringing anything new to the table, unfortunately. Like, it's kind of like a horror survival game kind of thing. Very like playing off the idea of werewolf. One of you is the traitor and trying to kill the others, and you have to work out who the traitor is. And the first volume was pretty good. I quite liked it, but honestly, I thought the second volume was just really disappointing. Like, all the twists it had, I kind of saw coming. And whilst the ending had a good twist, overall, yeah, I was just kind of disappointed with this manga volume. It didn't kind of live up to the kind of like twists and turns, and there was no shock for me, honestly. Like, I feel like I've maybe just read so much like survival horror stuff that there was everything that was in it I'd seen done before, but better, basically. So yeah, that was a shame. I still think it's a good series overall, but I gave the first volume a 4, I think, and I gave this volume a 3 because it just didn't surprise me. It didn't live up to the shocks and the twists that I really wanted from it, and overall, yeah, I just didn't end up loving the series, which is a shame because it's very much my type of genre. I then read another sequel, which was A Man and His Cat Volume 2. I also got this from BorrowBox. It was another one that I read in my 30 Manga in 30 Days. I read the first volume, quite liked it. So I thought it was like a chill, casual kind of thing, basically about an old man that adopts a very ugly cat and their life together. It's very just chill and sweet and humorous. I read the second volume, and honestly, it was just more of the same. It was sweet, it was cute, it had a lot of humour. It's just kind of like little vignettes of their life, but I don't think I'm going to be carrying on this series, honestly. Like, unless I just really want something that is easy to read, I don't think that there's very much in terms of storyline with this. So I don't think I'm just going to get very much out of it. So I don't think I'm going to be continuing this story on, unfortunately. Like, I think there are better, like, cute slice of life stuff out there that I would rather read than this series. So I gave it a 3, and yeah, it's just fine, basically. I then finally got around to reading volume 3 of Twisted Wonderland. This is the most recent volume that is out. Volume 4, which is the final one in this arc, should be coming out soon. I want to say in like a month or so. But yeah, I can't really talk much about this because this is 3 volumes in and spoilers, but it's still really good. It is adapting a mobile game that I absolutely adore, which is official Disney license, but it's all about villains, and it kind of like reinterprets Disney villains, mostly from the Renaissance era, as like house wardens in a magic school. So these guys are all like from the Queen of Heartstorm, basically. And yeah, it's really good. I love the art for this. Story's great. It's doing a great adaptation. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the final volume. I gave it a 4. And then the final 2 manga I read, actually, was a complete series. I read another duology. And it's one I've been meaning to get to for a while. I've seen it around a lot, and I just happened to actually find it in the library, which, if you know my library, is rare because my library does not have very much in terms of variety. They have like not very much. They have maybe about 30 or so manga, I want to say, which is better than it was a couple of years ago where they had maybe 10. But it's all like mostly random volumes and really long series they have like no first volumes ever, so it was really rare to find the entire series for this, and that is My Brother's Husband. So this is a LGBT manga, which basically you see it from the point of view of this Japanese man who is a single father and he has a young daughter, and out of the blue this Canadian guy shows up on his door, and it turns out that this Canadian guy is actually his brother's husband, and he had not seen his brother in many years. His brother had passed away recently and they'd fallen out of touch basically. He was aware of things that his brother was gay, and it was kind of like he seemed to be okay, but he was not aware that his brother had married, I don't think, or had ever met the guy. And yeah, basically, I've forgotten on their name, sorry, but basically he kind of comes along and he stays with them for a little while, and he finds himself learning and kind of accepting this man and accepting and kind of realizing things that he didn't realize, these prejudices that he didn't realize basically that he even had. Like he kind of assumed that he was like completely fine with gay people. And then he realized that he did have these prejudices, and it's what kind of caused this gap between him and his brother. And he realizes, like, he gets over it basically, like through this like really strange foreigner guy, and they kind of learn about each other. And yeah, he grows a lot through the course of the series, as does his daughter, who is like learning about like this for the first time ever. And yeah, it was a really, really sweet story. I really loved it. I gave it a 4-star overall. I was like checking to see what else the mangaka had done, because like he draws really well, but he draws muscly male bodies really well. There was some certain scenes that I was like, this is all very sweet and innocent, but that body doesn't look it. And yeah, I looked up and he does like a lot of like basically like barra comics, so like big muscly men having sex with one another essentially, and I'm like, that checks out. But this is not like this is a very wholesome story there. I really, really enjoyed it, and I would honestly really recommend it as well. I thought it had some great like representation. It has some great examination of like this internalized homophobia that you maybe don't even realize that you have until you're kind of faced with it, and how he kind of like starts to adapt to having this guy here, how they genuinely become friends. There's no romance in this, because that is not the point of this story. This is not a romance. This is about these two forming this connection over the death of someone that they both love very much. And yeah, it was just really good. Really enjoyed it. Definitely recommend. So on to the non-fiction. I have absolutely none of these physically because I read pretty much all of these by audio, I think. I think that is how I best get through non-fiction, is via audio. So 3 of these were for the Goodreads award, so I'm not going to go into those in detail. And the other 2 were actually just kind of like self-help books. So I'm not really going to go into detail with that anyway without getting too personal. So yeah, at the very bottom of the list, you've seen my Goodreads awards video, part 2, you will know, Killing the Witches by Bill O'Reilly, which is a non-fiction book talking about the history of the witch trials. It talks about it for like the first half of the book, not even the first half, and then it decides it's just going to talk about the American independence stuff, which has nothing to do with it. So yeah, I enjoyed the first little bit that was talking about the Salem witch trials. I learned a lot, but then the rest of the book was just pointless. I didn't like it in the end, unfortunately. Gave it a 2. I read You Are Not a Before Picture. Can't remember who the author is. Picture here. It's something I've been trying to look into, is like body image and that, and this wasn't quite the right sort of book for me, unfortunately, because a lot of what this book is about diet culture and about weight. And whilst I do have like issues with my weight, that is not like my main issue really with body image, to be honest. So it didn't really work for me in that kind of thing, but it was fine. I didn't really have any issues with it. I honestly don't really remember much about it. I gave it a 3, I want to say. Then I read Don't Tell Me to Relax, which is about like emotional resilience and that kind of thing. I thought it was pretty decent. I gave it a 3. Again, I don't remember much about it. I listened to this by audiobook maybe about 3 weeks ago, and while some of it has probably got embedded into my brain, none of it is anything I can talk about now or remember. but it was fine. I then read The Six, which is about the 6 female astronauts of America. I actually really liked that one. I thought it was really well written, good narrative flow, generally just really good. I gave that a 3-star. And then finally, this one is a slight spoiler, but it was the one I liked the best. And this is actually for part 3 of my Goodreads video because I ended up getting a little ahead of myself. I started reading the non-fiction, which is what I am reading in the month of August. But I read The Winner, Poverty by America, and I won't say very much about it because I will have a whole video coming where I give a more detailed review. But I will say that I thought this was very well written. I gave it a 4 overall. So, last 2 genres. We are going on to romance. And I'm going to have a little bit of a vent now, unfortunately. Because my first romance was a DNF, and it was a book I really did not want to DNF. But it was actually starting to affect me mentally negatively, and I was like, this is actually like not a good idea for me to carry on reading. And it's also unfortunate because it's an arc, and it's an arc that I was really excited about and really anticipating it being like a good book. And it is The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. I have read Red, White and Royal Blue before. I really loved it. I gave it a 5-star. I have yet to read Casey's other books, but I do have one last stop somewhere in my TBR shelf over there, which I am looking forward to reading. But this is Casey's newest book, The Pairing. It is a adult queer romance. I don't think it's out yet at the time of me filming this, but it might be out by the time this video actually goes up. Release date here. But it is basically about this former couple, essentially. It is like a second chance romance. And it is about these 2 people. One is a non-binary person called... Oh god, why am I forgetting their name? No, it's gone. I've forgotten their name. One is a non-binary person, and the other is a bisexual person called Kit. Bisexual man, sorry, called Kit. They're both bisexual. They're both very queer, and they used to date about 4 or 5 years previously. They were best friends when they were growing up, then they became a romantic item, and then it all went to hell. Basically, when they were supposed to have been going away on like this European trip together, they had a massive argument at the airport and they split up, and they have not seen each other since, basically. But they had been given like, because they cancelled their trip, obviously, they've been given like tickets essentially that they could like reuse them over a certain amount of time, and they chose to like do this basically on the same week, and they end up on the same European tour. So they are stuck essentially on a bus on a big European tour for like 2 weeks. They're not sleeping on the bus, sorry, they are staying in like hotels, but I think they're travelling by a bus, like very coach trip kind of thing. And I don't think it was the worst premise, I've got to say, but what I do think was the worst premise and what really killed the book for me was the fact that when these 2 kind of meet up again, and it's very awkward for a while, it's very clear that the 2 of them, or at least it's very clear that our main character is really struggling with the breakup still. They are clearly not over Kit, and Kit's lovely to the main character, but it's kind of very clear that there's a lot of negative feelings there. They're still very much in their like really negative, intense breakup feelings, and neither of them have had like a serious relationship since the other. All they've done is have a lot of hookups, and both of them basically trying to like to make like this trip work. They agree that they are going to try and be friends, and as part of this they are going to have a little friendly rivalry in that they are going to compete as to how many people they can hook up with across this 2-week trip throughout all of Europe, which I hate. I don't enjoy that kind of plotline. So yeah, basically, like if it had ended really fast with this plotline, which by the way, this is quite a long book, this is like a good 400-page plus kind of book, I wouldn't have minded it so much. It took up quite a lot of the book, and I got to maybe halfway through this book before I decided to DNF it. I got to basically where midway through we actually switched perspective from one character to Kit, and I have heard from other people that Kit's perspective is a lot better. The main character is honestly very emotionally immature. I didn't mind them, but I definitely really struggled with their decisions, and they were very emotional and very like just negative and caught up in a lot of stuff. And honestly, I think a lot of the issues that happened in this book was caused by them being like jealous and upset and hurting. And the thing that made me stop this book, like other than that, I hated this premise. Like I really was rooting for the couple is the thing. Like we like all the past stuff was like really getting to me. I was really liking them like as characters, as a couple, that kind of thing. Like Casey McQuiston has this way of writing that just gets me like right in the feels. Like she always hits me emotionally. And I think in this case, it hit me emotionally in like a bad way, because a lot of this book is so tied up in the grief of their breakup. And basically, this whole competition thing they do just felt like it was very toxic, and it just felt like they were hurting each other over and over again. And I just hated seeing it. And it honestly, like, it was upsetting, and it just made me really mad. So I did in the end just decide to DNF this. Like, it just really wasn't for me, unfortunately. Like, I just did not like what these people were doing to each other. Like, I wanted more. Like, it definitely had like the rom-com elements, but it was just very heavily about their breakup, it felt like, still, and the grief around that. And that is not something that I like want to relive from my past. So yeah, I could see where the story was going, and I do think it probably, like, overall I think it would have had a good ending, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think I could push back how negative this book was making me feel to get through it. I did actually just skip forward a little bit there, and I read one part because there is a thing where basically like our main character does kind of come out to Kit as being non-binary, and I wanted to see how that was handled, and I do think that was handled very well. So like I said, this is not me like digging against Casey McQuiston. I will definitely read more of this author's books in the future. I still want to read One Last Stop, but this book just really didn't work for me, unfortunately. Like, I think I should have been able to tell really from the premise, like, that the hookup competition was gonna really just ick me out. But yeah, it was just kind of gross, and I wasn't here for it. So I did make the decision to DNF it because, yeah, it was just, I was not having a good time with it basically at all. I read two other romance, and one of these was actually a reread, and that was Girls in Tears by Jacqueline Wilson. I listened to this via audiobook, I want to say, because I could not find a physical copy anywhere. And yeah, when my Jacqueline Wilson video comes out, which will hopefully be sometime in the end of September, when her new release Think Again comes out, which is going to be it's essentially the sequel to this Girls in Tears. I hope it's good. I really do, because Girls in Tears was awful. I hated this book. I gave it 2 stars. I did not have a good time. Really did not live up to, I mean, I think it was always the one I least liked anyway, even as a younger person. But yeah, it wasn't good. Essentially, did not enjoy it. For anyone that doesn't know, this is like it's a teeny kind of story about these 3 friends, and there is romance in it, but it's more like middle grade really than it is YA. The final romance, which thankfully, after the 2 duds I had, I hesitate to call this a romance really, because romance is just a very small element of what is in this book, because it is very much more of a drama, but it is like tagged as romance, so I've just put it in this category. But it is We Deserve Monuments by Jaz Hammonds. I read this for the YA fiction category of the Goodreads Award video, so go to there for like my fuller thoughts on it. But I absolutely love this book. This was a 5-star for me. I honestly highly recommend. It's so good. Basically it tells the story of this girl called Avery. She is a lesbian, and she is basically has to move to like this southern place in Georgia because her grandmother is dying, essentially. So she moves there with her mum and her father, leaving like her friends, leaving all her plans for her life that she has, and she starts to realize once she's there that not only is like her plans for her life like maybe not really what she wants anymore, but there is like a lot of mystery surrounding like her family and things that happened in the past that are really tied to things in the town, and she's like finding this out and having to deal with it, and having to deal with like what she wants to do and other people in the town and stuff. And yeah, it was really good. I love this. Like, I almost wasn't going to read this for the challenge, and something about this book, like, I just kept thinking about it, and I was like, I should just get it, because something about this is calling to me, and I'm so glad I did, because yeah, I absolutely love this. And this proves to me, honestly, that there is still like YA fiction out there that works for me. Like I do read mostly adult now, but like this was so good, honestly. So yeah, massive recommend. This was my other 2 5-star of the month. Okay, the last category now, and we have only 2 books in this one. One of them was an arc, and actually, just spoiler, I rated both of these graphic novels 3 stars. They were both fine. One was, I said, was an arc I got from NetGalley, and it's called Crave. It is like a teen dark sci-fi kind of story. It's got like a lot of like racy bits in it. There's like lots of nudity, that kind of thing, but it's kind of like a Black Mirror sort of story. I did actually quite like it. It's only the 1 volume, although it does kind of end in a way that suggests they might have more volumes in the future. But basically, it is about this app called Crave, which kind of like gets hugely popular within this college. I think it's a college, not a high school. So the people are like a bit older, but it gets hugely popular in this high school, and basically it's like, it just says like, what do you crave? And most of it is just like, I want to ask this person out on a date, that kind of thing, but it rapidly gets a lot darker and more twisted. And yeah, there's a lot of like mind games, and it kind of ends up getting into a situation where these teenagers have worked out what is going on with this app, and that it's really bad and it's really messing people up, and they have to try and stop it somehow. I don't think it necessarily dealt with some of the more heavy themes as good as it could have been, and I think that's just down to the length, honestly. But overall, it was pretty good. It's got a really nice art style, and if that's like that kind of like dark mirror-ish kind of thing is your thing, then I recommend. And then finally, the last book that I read was The Times I Knew I Was Gay by Eleanor Cruz. This is literally just like short comics. It's like literally just a page, a comic kind of thing. There's really not much to say about this, but it was very sweet. It was very well done, and it is essentially a memoir of sorts for this artist called Eleanor Cruz, and how they sort of figured out that they were a lesbian, basically, and kind of like they're coming to terms with this. And it was a very like long process, which I appreciated. There was a lot of like coming out and going back in and not really sure what they want and that kind of thing. The art is cute, but it is like kind of a bit rough at times, but it kind of like is just very like webcomic-y, I would say. But yeah, this was a really quick read. Like, I think I read this in half an hour or something, and it's pretty good. Interestingly, the author said that they originally like had just kind of put this out as like a zine, and then over years and years they just kind of expanded it until it became the book that it is today. So not really a lot to say about it, I've got to say. I don't think it brought anything particularly new to the table, but I think particularly for a teen perhaps, this is a really kind of like nice coming out memoir. So that is all the books that I read in the month. I still have a couple of books that I am in the middle of reading. Let me go get them. So I am currently reading When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. I'm not very far in, I'm like 66 pages. So I'll be carrying this on hopefully in the month of August, doing this as a buddy read with a friend. I have finished already one of the books that I did have ongoing, but the other book that I was reading was Heaven Official's Blessing Volume 1, which is a Dan May book, like a fantasy mystery LGBT story. And I got like about 100 or so pages into that one, and I've actually decided to put it down for now because I'm kind of really struggling with the translation of it. Like, the writing is just not quite hitting for me, so I'm just going to put it down for now, and I'll probably pick it up like at a later point, basically. So the only thing left to do really then is to have a look at the bingo board and see if we've made any progress this month. So read 10 horror or thriller books. I mean, it was Summerween, so I did indeed read quite a few horrors. So looking at that, we were at an 8. Let's see how many we've read. Okay, so we read You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight, Bury Your Gaze, Heads Will Roll, From a Buick 8, Freakslaw, that takes us to 5, and I think that's it. Yeah, so I read 5. So we are going from a 8 to a 13, which isn't bad. So we've actually cleared that board. We've bingoed it. So that is another one that we've managed to clear off, which is great. Ignoring the middle space again because I haven't done any. 10 sequels or books in a series. I cleared this like last month, I think, but I'm still counting them. So looking at what I read, I think I read, I want to say 5 in total. Let me check. So I read My Brother's Husband Volume 2, Doubt Volume 2, and Man and His Cat Volume 2. No, I can't count Assassin's Quest. Twisted Wonderland Volume 3. This is all manga, basically. And I think that's... Oh, and Girls in Tears. Sorry, that was a sequel as well. So that actually comes to 5, I believe. So we're actually going from a 14 to a 19. Next, read 10 sci-fi books. I read no sci-fi this month, so that is not getting cleared. This month, BFF controls my TBR. Yes, finally, I'm actually be able to put something in this category. So, of the books that my friend recced for me, she recced 4 books for me. I don't believe I've read all of them yet, though. See, I am reading Heaven and Bishop's Blessing, so I am going to count it. I'm reading When the Moon Hatched. I did read From a Buick 8. And let's see, what was the other books that was recommended to me? The Invocations, I haven't started yet. I'm hoping to get to that in August. And I think that was it, you know. Yeah, it was. That was it. So we're going to put a 4 in there because it was 4 that were recommended to me. I'll take them off if I don't actually end up reading them. But for now, we are going to just put that as a 4. And then the final one, 10 rainy day books. I was at 7. I'm going to say, I think I definitely did this. The Book Eaters, I'm going to say, was a rainy day book because I had wanted to read it for ages and I finally finished it. It's a shame it wasn't good, but I'm going to count it as being a rainy day book. And then, honestly, it's a shame, but the Jasad Heir, that was something that I've been wanting to get to, and unfortunately I obviously ended up DNFing it, but yeah, it was a rainy day book, so I guess I am going to count it, and that does bring us up to a 9, so we're really close in getting a bingo for that one. So, that is it for this wrap-up. Feel free to put down below which of the books that I talked about that you think was like one that you really enjoyed if you read it. What was your favourite book that you read in the month of July? Let me know. I'm curious. As always, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!